Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar, Pre-Sale, Sale Process, and Post-Sale Considerations in M&A Transactions, brought to you by Mertz Taggart. I'm Laura Levitt. I'm the editor over at Behavioral Health Business. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping notes. First, you'll see a variety of boxes on your screen that can be moved and resized to meet your preferences. A couple of boxes to note. The resource box has today's presentation slides and any additional resources related to the webinar, and Q&A. The Q&A box is also there to ask questions during the webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but feel free to ask your questions as they come to you, including on demand. If you are watching this webinar on demand, still submit questions and our presenters may be able to get back to you. A recording of this webinar will be available on Behavioral Health Business website. If you happen to run into any technical issues during our webinar, first try to refresh your browser, and if the problem persists, reach out to us through that Q&A box. Thank you to Mertz Taggart for sponsoring this webinar. Now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. We have with us Dr. Joshua Rosenthal, who is the founder and CEO of Manhattan Psychology Group, a portfolio company of ARC Health Partners. Crystal Contini, who is a member of McDonald Hopkins, and Kevin Taggart, who is the managing partner of Mertz Taggart. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd love to give each of you a chance to talk a little bit more about what you do. Let's start with you, Josh.
Great, thank you. Thanks for having me. So my name is Josh Rosenthal. I'm a licensed psychologist. I've been licensed since 2008. Started my practice in Manhattan as a solo practitioner, specializing in child and family. And then slowly grew the practice over time, hiring more people. I ran a summer camp, special needs summer camp, a big apple day program for 9 summers, built a software program, and then just kept growing and growing the practice, and stopped seeing patients about 5 years ago to focus on being full-time CEO since we had gotten so large, and ended up selling the practice to ARC Health Partners in September 2023. I'm still the CEO, but now a member of 23 portfolio companies across the country. I participate as a practice partner liaison, so that means I get to work with ARC leadership and the practice partners, and sort of go in between and help everyone, work together and solve problems together. Which I really like, and learn from the ARC leadership team. And then I'm also doing some consulting and advising on the side with some mental health startups, since I love learning about new, innovative things happening in mental health. And like I said in my bio, I live on the Upper West Side with my wife and daughter.
Great, thank you. Crystal, can we hear a little bit more about what you do?
You're muted.
Starting off with a bang. Crystal Contini, I chair the Mergers and Acquisitions Practice Group at McDonald Hopkins. I have been there for 17 years. We have a team of lawyers that specialize in doing transactions in the healthcare space, particularly behavioral health. And we predominantly represent first-time sellers who are selling their practice, like Josh did, to either a publicly backed entity or an entity that is owned by private equity. So we work with our clients from a legal perspective to help them get the best transaction legal terms in a transaction.
Thank you. Kevin.
Hey, Kevin Taggart with Mertz Taggart. We're an M&A firm that specializes in home care and hospice companies, as well as behavioral health companies. I got in the space. I used to own a home care company that my current business partner helped me sell in 2010. And so I've been doing this for about 15 years. And then in 2014, we got into behavioral health M&A. At this point, I run our behavioral health practice. He runs our home care and hospice practice. And we generally work with owners like Josh when they either want to sell 100% of their company or a certain portion of it and stay on and roll equity, as we'll talk about today. And just as a little bit more of a backdrop here, both Crystal and I represented Josh when he decided to partner with ARC Health. So we've all worked together through his transaction. Obviously, Crystal from the legal side, me from the M&A side. So hopefully going to give you some real world examples of just some of the things that Josh went through as he kind of contemplated the sale and then went through it successfully.
Perfect. Well, I'm really excited to get all of these different perspectives. I feel like we have a great swath of legal, M&A, and provider perspectives, and especially having all work together. So I think it's going to be a really good conversation. Josh, let's start with you. You know, Manhattan Psychology Group was your business, but then became the portfolio company of ARC Health Partners, which has done a significant number of deals over the past couple of years. You know, can you tell me a little bit about a background on how you came to that deal, growing up that business until the point of the sale? And it would also be great to understand your personal and professional goals for that transaction.
Sure. So, you know, my wife is also a psychologist and co-owner of Manhattan Psychology Group, but she was more involved in just seeing patients, and I was responsible for the day-to-day business operations. So in a lot of ways, I was making business decisions sort of on my own. You know, we consult, but in the end, I didn't really have like a partner, like some people have business partners. And so as the business was growing and, you know, we do mental health and neuropsych testing, and we got really big into ABA and special ed services. So we started branching out and doing a lot of things. You know, at our peak when we sold, we had 350 staff members. So it was quite an organization. And, you know, I never thought I was ever going to build a business that I was going to sell. I just thought I'd see patients like most, you know, psychologists opening up a private practice. But it just started to get so big that there were a lot of pieces of running the business that I didn't really enjoy anymore. Like I liked, you know, growing the business. I liked working with great people, but there were so many things, cash flow and payroll and just all of these things that were just very stressful, to be honest. And, you know, we sort of during COVID, like a lot of practices, we were in a good position because we were already kind of working virtually, that we were able to do very well during COVID, like a lot of other mental health practices. So, you know, when a lot of people stepped back and worked less or even shut down, unfortunately, we were able to catapult ahead. So our EBITDA, our revenue just sort of skyrocketed during COVID. And it was during that process that I realized I might have a company that someone might be interested in buying. I never really thought about it up until that moment. And then, you know, the decision to sell or partner was like, okay, you know, I think I might have something here. I'm not really sure because I've never thought about it before. I know that I don't see myself doing this by myself for the next 10 years. I'm way too stressed out. Like, what are my options? And so, you know, I sort of went out and I called, I don't know, 5 or 6 different behavioral health bankers and brokers and talked to a bunch of them and ended up, you know, settling on Kevin because I liked our interactions. I thought he was very trustworthy. You know, one of the great things about Kevin is that, like, he'll look at your business, he'll give you his thoughts and analyze some things without, you know, asking for money or anything like that. I don't know if he does that now, but when it was with me, he didn't do that. And so that made me feel really good. Then he gave me sort of understanding of my business that I didn't have before. And he said, yeah, I think you have, you know, a sellable business here. And so I decided to partner with him. And, you know, I partnered in September 2023, and we really started the process a year earlier. I think we signed on in November of 2022. And then leading up until that, I'd say I was thinking about it for maybe 6 to 9 months before that. So it's really quite a long process of like personally getting yourself ready, thinking about your goals, thinking about what you want to happen, thinking about, you know, where do you want to be after the sale? Like all of that mental and emotional stuff is really important. So by the time I partnered with Kevin, really, I had sort of a working model of how I wanted to go. Now, it definitely changed, and that's part of Kevin's job, is to sort of advise on how these things can play out. But, you know, the process was long. And then shortly after that, I partnered with Crystal. And I really do feel like I got, you know, the dream team. And I can tell you why. You know, when you're doing something like this, you want people that you like talking to. You just like talking to them. if you're going to be going through this process, which is very stressful, and you're spending hours with these people, you want to enjoy the time with them. And that was something that was very important to me, not only just being good at their jobs, but also just good people. So, so we partnered up and we ended up, selling to Arc Health. And, it was a crazy process. It's like you're selling your baby. My practice was my baby. I raised it for 15 years. And then all of a sudden it's not your baby anymore. And so you have to sort of adjust to that. And I'm very happy that I did. It wasn't linear or smooth by any means, but it was workable. And Arc Health, I was very fortunate because they're very good people as well. So all of the bumps and bruises that come along the way, you just work it out together, which is also something that I encourage people to be thinking about. Like, what is it like to talk with these people? Do you trust talking to them? The same way that I felt about Kevin and Crystal. So I forget the third part of your question though, but I know I answered 2 of the 3 questions, I think.
No, it's just kind of talking about your personal and professional goals for the transaction. And, even to kind of tag on to that too, how did you prepare for this?
My personal and professional goals were, I knew I wanted to partner with someone that was going to take a lot of the burden off of me so I could just focus on what I like to do, which was visionary, culture, leadership, growth. Those are the things I really enjoyed. All the other stuff, recruiting and hiring and comp models and, billing and payroll, all that stuff I could not stand doing. So I knew I wanted to not do those things anymore. Arc or anyone that is really a good buyer in the space will design the deal around making sure that you as the owner are getting to do the things that you actually want to do, because otherwise you're just going to be unhappy doing more of the things don't want to do. So I sort of, talked to them about what I wanted to do, where I saw myself in a couple of years. And, we worked our way towards that. It's been, about 1.5 years post-sale. And I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, which is great. Obviously I wanted to take some, chips and some money off the table to secure for my family, which I was able to do. But it's not like they write a check and you walk away. You're going to be together for years. And which is the way it is most of the time in healthcare deals, from what I understand. So you need to make sure that you like working with them. They're good people. They're trustworthy people. And so those were my personal and professional goals.
I think, Laura, one of the things that Josh did pretty well that a lot of sellers don't always do, he's a little bit humble here, but, he had a very good team in place that really, by the time we got involved, ran the business day to day. And so, he'd already kind of extricated himself, and, it sounds like he's extricated himself a little bit further since the sale. But I think that was an important key to him having such a competitive process too. Got a good team.
I would agree with that, because I think a lot of buyers, they often want the founder to be tied up for at least 3 to 5 years post-sale. And that becomes an even more acute requirement if it really is centered around just one person, just the owner. And so the benefit that Josh had is that he had a full team. So it wasn't just him that was needed to run the business. It was him and multiple other people that could run this business, run it successfully. They had all been working together, and it takes some of the pressure off of some of the, I would say, post-closing requirements that most buyers have, which is a really big commitment of 3 to 5 years post-closing, to help with the transition, to be part of the team. And sometimes it's even a longer runway for certain businesses, because those are the people that usually know the clients. They know how the business is run. And so it's really important to keep them around. But I think Josh was fortunate because he had a team around them and they were all able to kind of move forward together.
Yeah, that's true. I'm glad you guys mentioned that. I forgot about how important that was, because otherwise, like you said, like everything still, like I'd be in the same position that I was in, as if, I hadn't sold, which is like, it still all falls on me. And so now what ARC does is the whole point of ARC or a buyer is to add value, right? Like what's the point of selling or partnering with someone if they're not going to add any value? So ARC was able to add all the value to my business of the things that I never wanted to do anyways. So that's why it was also a very good partnership.
Crystal, I'd like to go to you for some expertise on this. From your experience advising on behavioral health transactions, what are the most critical but often overlooked considerations from owners who are thinking about selling their business?
Maybe I'll kind of loop into what we were talking about. Most buyers often require the sellers to roll over equity. I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to sell my business. I'm going to ride out into the sunset. I'm going to take a lot of money off the table. And that is true. There is that ability to take cash off the table, but most buyers want to incentivize the sellers to stick around. And as part of that, part of the cash that they would have otherwise received in connection with their sale gets, quote, rolled over, which means they get equity in the buyer. And that equity is usually anywhere from 20 to 40% of the purchase price. And it ties that owner to the business post-closing. And so now we're not only negotiating the sale of your business, but we're also negotiating what your post-closing world looks like and what it means to be a minority owner of a business that you used to own 100% of. And your ability to capitalize on that rollover equity often comes with some strings and some attachments. For example, there's usually a restrictive covenant agreement that is tied to continuing with the business. There's also often some vesting involved to keep you tied to the business. Your ability to capitalize on the rollover equity requires you to stay with the business for a period of time post-closing. So I think a lot of people focus very much so on the sale part, but there's not always this focus on the post-closing world and what it looks like to work with a partner to run the business that you used to captain the ship 100% by yourself on. And so it kind of changes the dynamic, and that legal document actually lives on for the entire period that you are with that business. Whereas the purchase agreement, for the most part, you sell your business, it's done, other than some post-closing liabilities. And so that piece is a big legal piece that I think takes a lot of focus, and in some ways is one of the most important parts of the deal.
I think one of the other things to keep in mind as is, potential seller contemplating a sale is when Josh and I first started chatting, he really didn't want to roll equity, wasn't super excited about the idea. And I think the more he learned about ARC specifically, I think the more excited he got about the prospect of rolling equity. He got to know that team pretty well. There was a doctor there that had kind of gone through, what Josh is going through currently. Previously, he was an orthodontist and had created quite a bit of wealth for himself. And he was now part of the private equity group that backs ARC. And so I think the more you keep an open mind to that prospect, and it's not right for everybody, but I think Josh would tell you he was excited about it when he originally wasn't very excited about the idea.
Yeah, I can speak to that. And I think that's one of the things that I like about you, Kevin, is that you're very gentle with your suggestions, right? Like, I was very dead set on like, I want to just get a check, and then I don't want to be I don't want to be connected. I want to just, be free. Right. And Kevin would gently suggest like, okay, like that's one type of buyer, right? There may be that type of buyer, but that may not be the type of buyer you want to sell to or partner with. And so just try to be open to the process, right? Like we're going to, run a big process. We're going to have a lot of eyeballs on your practice. Just try to be open to what comes your way. And, in hindsight, it was silly that I sort of like thought I knew what I wanted. Anytime you're doing something for the first time, you got to be open to the experts, right? And so I thought, you, Kevin, did a really good job of sort of like gently advising, right? Like not being too forceful and also not too passive. It's a fine line to have someone on your side that you trust, and is looking out for your best interest as well as their own, right? Like everyone's making money out of the deal. Let's be honest, right? But in the end, like if someone walks away really unhappy, it's not really a good deal, So I really appreciated looking back in hindsight how you handled me in that situation.
Thanks, Josh. I don't know that my kids would agree I'm quite as gentle, but I'm glad you feel
Right.
that way.
Right. I'll talk to them. I'll tell them.
Yeah.
No, Josh, I wanted to kind of go back to you. If you could do anything differently, knowing there would be a sale, would you? I know you're happy with
Oh,
the outcome and the buyer, but I'm sure there might be things, even early on, you might have changed if you knew you'd be selling one day.
100%. First thing I would have done is gotten my finances in order from the beginning of that I started my practice. I mean, that's just not something that most clinicians do when they start a practice, is like get out an Excel spreadsheet and understand what's happening. I never did that. And when I did do that, it was sort of like so late in the game. And I'm glad I did do it because it helped going into the sale. So if you're ever thinking about sale, you have to make sure that your books are in order. Like, it's going to make Kevin's job a complete nightmare and ultimately selling much more difficult. And then you'll probably get less money because it's so confusing and convoluted what's actually happening. So I would say, going back, if I could have started the process of getting like real good financials in, understanding the financials of my practice way before I even thought about selling, that would have been, really, really helpful. Other than that, I don't think so. I mean, we had such a good team. We do have a great team. We're doing great clinical work. And all that is the same, that hasn't changed at all. So I'd say that the deep understanding of your financials and really clean and clear books.
Yeah, and I don't think you can start that too early. I mean, we love to get engaged with people 2, 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, right now we're working with somebody that we've known 11 years, that's finally ready. So I think the sooner you can get kind of your house in order from the leadership, the financials, compliance is a big thing these days that, buyers have gotten a lot more educated. So you just want to make sure you've got a tight ship. I mean, buyers are going to spend, on the low end, a couple $100,000 to several $1 million in due diligence costs by hiring experts to come in and do a deep dive into your business. So the more you can prepare in advance, just the better outcome you're going to have.
Can I just add something? It's also really helpful for you to know, I'm sorry, Crystal, how profitable your business actually is. We tend to sort of overvalue our own businesses and think like, our shit don't stank. But, your business is really not, if you can't prove that your business is worth something without you contributing to it, then it's probably not worth as much as you think. And so, people think that they're making a lot of money when they're actually not making a lot of money. And you don't want to go into a process and find that out, right? Like that, you don't want that to be a surprise for you or for Kevin or for the buyer. So it makes sense to get everything clear, because a lot of people are running, they're taking a lot of deductions, they're running personal things through the business. Like, it's very common for that to happen. And so all of that is going to come out. Like, there's nothing that's not going to come out. And you want to get ahead of that, because it also makes you look really good to the buyer, right? Like, if things are not clear, it just starts the relationship off on the wrong foot. And you really do need to have a good working relationship with these people that you're going to partner with. So that's all I'll say. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Crystal.
No, I'm glad you brought up the financial side and like people running different things through their business, which is really normal when it's just your practice, your business. But when the buyer comes in, that all of those extraneous things, if it's confusing, if it's not something they can easily back out, it causes a lot of confusion and a lot of time away from other things to focus on. The other piece is to understand not just the profitability of your business, but what your go forward world will look like. Because I think a lot of people focus on, oh, my income is going to stay the same post-closing. That is not the case often. Usually what also happens is, in connection with your business, you're taking distributions, maybe you pay yourself a small salary, but your quote salary isn't really how you're making your money. You are taking distributions. Those things stop post-closing. Most buyers will put the founding owners back on what would be a normal commercial salary for that business, which I guarantee you will be less than what you are drawing today. The thought being is you're monetizing some of that and you're taking that cash off the table at closing. So you're getting paid, a big purchase price, hopefully. And that is supposed to kind of backstop what would have otherwise been some of your salary in the future. So when you think about the overall value of the deal, it's not just understanding the purchase price, but what do your economics look like post-closing as well?
That's a great point. Crystal, what is the best time or way a seller can begin engaging their attorney and get the most out of that relationship?
So I think Kevin mentioned compliance and some of the other legal things that become really important in a transaction. We love to be engaged a year, if not more, in advance of a deal, but we also recognize that people often don't want to spend money on lawyers until they know they have an M&A transaction in place. So I understand that there's some tension there. But the sooner we can get in and understand, are there some compliance issues? Have you had a HIPAA breach? Are there like some things that are really manageable that we can come in and help you with on the front end? That is something that the sooner we are called, the better. And some of it is just, it kind of just comes down to good corporate hygiene, so that when the buyer does their due diligence, Kevin's right, like they'll spend so much money digging into your business and understanding it. I mean, a lot of buyers today want to do payer audits, and they want to understand how your billing is and like, what are you doing? And sometimes it helps if you have the legal person to give you some advice on that on the front end, so that if there are some things that need to be positioned or clarified, because we all know that there's a lot of gray area in the healthcare world, if we can kind of try to mitigate some of the questions that the buyer is going to ask during the sale process, the sooner we are involved, the more we are able to help.
And some of those compliance issues that Crystal touched on, the billing piece specifically, if you're overbilling, say Medicaid or Medicare specifically, sometimes those can be deal killers that no amount of money is going to fix, in terms of like a purchase price reduction, if you're doing things incorrectly, because buyers worry about the risk of the government doing an audit and coming back and clawing back a bunch of money and maybe some punitive penalties to go along with it. So you can get that cleaned up in advance. And most of the time it's not fraudulent. It's just, unintentional. So.
Can I just say something about picking your attorney and working with your attorney? Because I think that I learned a lot in the way I did it. And I like the way that I ended up doing it, which was I forced Crystal to go line by line with me on all 20 of the deal documents. So my legal bill was double what it could have been, but I had a very clear understanding of what was going to happen during the deal, after the deal, what my real negotiation points were, like what actually mattered that I should be focused on. And, it's such a big thing. And I think that sometimes people don't fully understand what all these complicated documents mean and how they're related to each other, because they are sort of connected in a very convoluted, if you're not a lawyer, like these things don't make sense to most people. So I would say when you're picking an attorney, you want someone that not only do you like talking to and feels like gives you, is there for you, but is willing and interested in explaining everything to you as if you're a kindergartner, right? Like you just need to understand these things and make them very, very simple so that you know what is going to happen. And Crystal, you're very good at that. You're very patient. You know how to speak to people that don't understand, that are not lawyers, because not every lawyer knows how to speak to other non-lawyers, right? And so you need someone that knows how to talk. Like, so if I ask a question and, the lawyer goes, that should be okay, that's not the answer you want. You want like, yes, that's okay, or I'm not sure, let me check on that and get back to you, right? And so, it's a very personal experience. Like I was very anxious and very stressed out for many, many months. And you want people that are gonna, hold your hand in some ways and not make you feel, worse about asking questions or being anxious or needing to talk to them again. Can we go over that document again? It's like, this is your life. So I just want to point that out about Crystal. She's very good at that.
Yeah, and I think,
appreciate that.
sorry to beat a dead horse on this one, but I think having a healthcare M&A attorney is also critical. We had a deal that, frankly, I introduced Crystal early on. They decided to go with another firm, which, I wasn't crazy about. And then, the other firm just didn't understand healthcare. They were a fine law firm, but just didn't understand healthcare M&A, didn't have a specialist on the team, didn't know anything about the regulatory environment. So I had to call Crystal and say, hey, talk to these guys again. And now she's kind of pulling this deal back together because the other firm just wasn't a healthcare firm. So sorry, well, I'll quit plugging Crystal there for a couple minutes, but it's true.
Well, I appreciate that. The healthcare piece is really important because things that you can get away with in other industries, you cannot get away with in healthcare. And there are a lot of people that come into the healthcare space, particularly behavioral health, that come from other industries and other disciplines. And then they try to run their business in the same way. And there are just a lot more rules, a lot more compliance hurdles, and the barrier to entry into a healthcare profession or a healthcare business is quite high. And so the legal side of that, it's not just normal M&A, this is healthcare M&A, and it has some very specific pieces to it. And just to comment on one of the things that Josh was saying is, like, one of the conversations we often had, and Josh would always ask me, where is the teeth? What is the teeth in this document? Like, how is this going to actually impact me? Because at the end of the day, you are going to receive hundreds of pages of documentation, a lot of very complex legal concepts in them, but many of them can be boiled down into key principles that the seller, the owner, needs to understand. And it might be that it turns out they aren't willing to agree to certain terms once they understand them. Even when I tell them it's market and normal, they might still not like it. And so part of it is understanding, like, where are the goals? And Laura, you mentioned, like, what were your goals as part of the deal? It's understanding what those goals are and then finding the places where, maybe this doesn't happen in every deal, but there's an opportunity to negotiate something because of a particular seller or because of a particular situation. And unless you're willing to engage in that, not just as a lawyer, but as a client, you kind of miss out on some of those pieces to a transaction that turn out to be really important.
Yeah,
and actually, Crystal,
sorry,
Go
just
ahead,
add
Josh.
one thing. Like, I think tying into your goals, like, is understanding what's really important to you and how does that translate into the legal documents, right? Because you're trying to project yourself into the future and imagine, okay, 3 years from now, how am I going to feel about this? 5 years from now, what do I want to be doing with my time? What happens if they sell again? What do I want to happen to me, right? Like, all of these scenarios you have to run through. You really have to, break it down into flowcharts. Okay, if this happens, then that kicks in, and then that's going to leave me here. Am I okay with that? Can I live with that? Okay. If that kicks in and it goes there, can I live with that? No, I actually can't live with that. I need to go back and negotiate for that one thing because I can't live with that one thing. And it's just very tedious and time consuming, but it's so important. And so I would recommend that to anyone, is just understand, all the different permutations of how things can go, because they will not go the way that you plan. And you need to figure out what you're okay with and what are you not okay with, because if you don't think about that, I guarantee you that will happen over the life cycle of your deal and integration and the world. And you want to be prepared for it. You just don't want to be surprised.
Yeah, and I know we talked a lot about how it was important to have healthcare specialty, but Crystal, I wanted to talk a little bit, kind of dive into that, but what are some of those potential legal pitfalls for sellers? What is the other things they can avoid for them during that M&A process?
So and this kind of goes back to Kevin and his expertise, which is one of the biggest, I want to say, it's a legal pitfall because there are legal provisions of the document that manage it, but it has to do with working capital. That is probably one of the most complex portions of a transaction, and also the place where there's often a lot of post-closing disputes and or discussions in connection with the deal. And so understanding what your working capital is at the time of close becomes really important. And what I mean by that, it's mostly for a healthcare practice, it's mostly your accounts receivable less your expenses. There's obviously, 15 pages of discussion about it, but it is really meant to be you understanding what working capital you can deliver at closing. And if you deliver less, the buyer usually has the opportunity to try to claw some of that back. But on the converse side, if you actually deliver more working capital than a target that is kind of normal for your business, there's also an opportunity for you to capture some of the upside. And so there's a lot of negotiation around that. And that is why it is very important to what Kevin and Josh was saying earlier, which is understanding your financial situation and understanding your business, understanding the accounts receivable and your payer mix and how payers pay you, because that business piece has legal ramifications that run through the documentation.
Yeah, and to that point, Crystal, thank you. We are working on a deal right now that's two sophisticated buyers. One's a private equity group that's buying, and the other is a private equity group that's selling a portfolio company. And they're both very sophisticated, but we're $1 million apart on the working capital target, which means somebody will have to write the other person a check, post closing, depending on how that works out. And nobody wants to do that. So it is important to get your arms around that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I mean, Kevin, you have seen so many of these deals. What are some of the mistakes that you see sellers make as they contemplate a sale and go through that M&A process?
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of hammered the not preparing for a sale in advance. I think that's critical. Having a good team in place. A lot of things we've already talked about, but this one may sound a little more self-serving than I intended to sound, but I truly believe this. Whether you hire us or hire somebody else, that you should have an M&A advisor that ideally knows the space you're playing in. And I'll tell you why. I mean, this is a complex, difficult process to get through. So it's not only trying to get you the highest price on the best terms. I mean, obviously those are important, but just getting through the process. If you've never done this before, you're at such a disadvantage. Private equity loves to do a direct, or what they call a proprietary deal, because ultimately they know they're going to pay less. And then, as you get down in the process, 90 days, 120 days, they've kind of got you. And so you just are at such a disadvantage if you don't do it. And look, I can give a ton of examples of, we sold a mental health business a year or so ago that was, got an offer from private equity. They really liked them. They offered $7 to $8 million initially. We told them we thought the number was low and we could do better. We did a valuation for them. We didn't charge for it. And we said, look, I think you can certainly do better. They said, hey, we really like this group. I said, that's fine. We'll still put together marketing materials. We'll let them bid on the deal. And they came back at between $11 and $12 million. And I said, look, you can do whatever you want. But I still think we could do better in the market. And we ended up selling the business for $15 million. So, we have examples where we've gotten $20 million more from the original offer just because it's a competitive process and buyers know that. And if there's a buyer, by running kind of a broad process, you really get exposed to lots of different buyers and you really don't know who's going to be the best buyer until you kind of go through that process and who's motivated for one reason or not. And there's lots of different reasons that, groups will often pay more than market for a deal because it's strategic to them for one reason or another. So I didn't mean to sound as self-serving as it was, but even if you don't use us, use somebody.
I'll agree, because I often get the call because we also represent clients like day to day in their general healthcare practice. And the way they usually become interested in doing a sale is someone just calls them out of the blue and says, hey, we want to buy your business. They build a relationship. I get a term sheet. And then I start looking at the term sheet. I'm like, okay, the fact that my client is thinking about this makes me think that this is something they might want to pursue. And then I read the term sheet and there's some legal terms that are a little unusual. The purchase price maybe isn't as high as I would hope it would be, but also there might be extra holdbacks and escrows. And that's usually, and not all clients want to do it. And I understand everyone has different goals, but that's usually a moment where you can say, okay, it might be worth thinking about this more, talking to an investment banker, talking to someone like Kevin, who can give you a pretty good read on the front end and say, you know what, you should consider looking at a competitive process, because it keeps people honest. And it also ends up allowing you to see whether or not this was actually a one-off, or whether or not there might be an opportunity to maximize to a higher value. And as Josh was saying earlier, there are different kinds of buyers. And maybe this particular buyer is offering one thing, but someone else might offer something that fits you better. And unless you run a process with Kevin or someone like him, you don't really get that input or that feedback. So I would agree, like having that understanding of the market and what your business could actually be worth is really important.
I mean, it's like, how many people try to sell their own houses? I mean, unless you're a broker, you're not selling your own house. You hire a broker to sell your house for you. So it's like, and your business is probably going to be way more than your house, right? So kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and Josh, I wanted to kind of get into your relationship with the buyer as well. As the seller, at what point should you start developing that relationship with the buyer? Is it before the actual deal discussion takes place, during, after? What did that look like for you?
Well, I mean, the whole process is so unusual, right? It's like you decide to sell, you put together a whole marketing packet, you blast it out there. The world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. You go from IOIs to LOIs. And then at some point you decide, okay, this is the, 5 to 10 people that I'm really considering. I'm going to, either have Zoom meetings with them, or I'm going to sit down and break bread with them and have a management meeting with them. And then from that management meeting, it gets into a signed LOI, and then you go into due diligence. And then 3 months later, you're married to them forever. I mean, it's like the weirdest thing. It's so weird, and I just really paid attention to all the sort of interpersonal signals, all the little emails and texts and phone calls and Zoom meetings, and just to get a vibe on all the different buyers. What is it like to talk with them, before we even got to LOIs? And it's all important. It's all super important, because it just gives you a sense of what it's going to be like to be married to this person. And, and also, when you get into due diligence, like, you can still pull out. Like, it's not done. It's not done until you sign, And so during the due diligence, where you really get into it with them, you're going back and forth every day with documents. You're meeting with Kevin, you're meeting with your, Crystal. Sometimes you're talking directly to the buyer, right? It really depends. And, you get a sense of what it's like. Like, going through due diligence is like trial by fire, and if it's a terrible experience in due diligence, I guarantee you it's going to be a terrible experience to be married to them. Versus if it's a good experience through due diligence, hard, but good, meaning fair and balanced and productive, then it's probably going to be a good marriage. And that's sort of the way I approached it, and, I would just encourage everyone else to sort of see it the same way. Like, it's not done until you sign. And if you're getting bad vibes, just don't do it, because it's not worth signing away your company, which is most of the time our babies. We built them our whole lives as practitioners, and then being stuck and married to them for the rest of your life, or until, something else happens.
Yeah. I mean, Kevin, you've gone through a lot of these deals. Any feedback on that and in that relationship with the buyer?
Yeah, I mean, I think to, expand on Josh's point, I do think that every interaction you have with them is another point to kind of make a judgment on them, on how you're going to work together. And, it's interesting for us. Let's say we have 8 management meetings, for a business where we've kind of narrowed the list down to the top 8, so to speak. And, our seller often has kind of a predisposed favorite or two prior to them meeting. And then almost inevitably, almost every time, it doesn't turn out to be one of those top 2 favorites, because as you get to to know them in, a management meeting that's 4 hours long. And then, ideally you want to try and go to dinner with them, spend some more time with them. Usually it's the dinner where you maybe find out that, you're not quite as crazy about this person, or you really do like this person better. And you so I think the more time you can spend with them during the process, the better. And then also, talk to people that have worked with them in the past, look at their track record. I think those are also helpful, but yeah, I think the more interactions you can have, the better. So,
yeah, I mean, when I was, sorry, I just want to add, like, I spoke to, I don't know, 5 to 10 of the portfolio companies at ARC before I decided to go with them. And I just asked them, like, hey, are you happy you did this? What was it like? And it was all positive. And I was like, okay, if these people have gone through it already and they're still glad that they did it, that's a good signal, right? It's not everything, but it's a good signal. So,
I mean, there are a lot of different types of buyers. How do you think about identifying the right buyer? Josh, do you want to start that one?
I mean, Kevin could probably is more of an expert, but for me, it was like, okay, what does the offer look like? Is it a number that I really like? Is it broken up in a way that makes me feel good? Like if it's half at closing and half earn out, like that's not good. That's not what you want in a healthcare deal. Maybe that's good in other deals, and so it gives you a sense of how they're thinking about working with you, right? Like, and so that was part of it. Sort of the total enterprise value. How is it broken up? And then, what does the structure of the buy side look like? Like, do they have a management team in place? Like, is it the private equity group who's actually running the company, right? Like, where are they in their life cycle? Because they're, depending on who's buying you, they have a plan in place. And so you need to understand what their plan is. You need to understand who are the people in charge, who's going to be your new boss. I've never had a boss. I mean, I haven't had a boss since I was, in grad school. Or my first job out. So what's it going to be like to have a new boss, someone that you have to report to? And do you like this person? Can you talk to this person? Those are the things that I was thinking about. And for me, ARC Health was just checking all those boxes. And I feel very, very lucky that they were in the process and then I picked them. And I'm glad I did. But I was very conscientious about those check boxes because there were a lot of companies that I was looking at that I was like, oof, that's not good. Like that does not check the box for me. And so, yeah, you just want to be very diligent about it.
When I do a postmortem with my clients, I think the number one thing they struggle with, even if they pick a good partner, is exactly what Josh is talking about, which is the fact that now they have a boss. And it is, I think, really difficult to go from having this business where you run it, you don't have to ask anyone permission, you don't have to really explain yourself to anyone. And now you have a boss, you have someone that you have to answer to, someone you have to provide information to and justify expenses and hiring. I think it's a big adjustment. I don't think it's a reason not to do it because I think there are also a lot of benefits to selling your business. And actually, it's not just the cash you get at closing, although I recognize that's a big one. But one of the other benefits is to have the opportunity to work with a partner and essentially, if it's private equity, use their money to take your business to heights that you never thought you could ever reach. And you probably couldn't because you didn't have the capital to do it. And so that is part of the magic of working with a private equity buyer or even a public company buyer who is expanding their operations, is you get to maximize some of the things in your business that you wouldn't be able to do on your own. So you get to participate in that process, which I think a lot of sellers find exciting, but you are part of a team now. And I think that is a big adjustment. And I think it's really hard to kind of get your mind around it. And if you find people you like to work with, it makes that team atmosphere just a little bit easier to deal with. But it is hard. And I have seen many of my clients, 3 years later, just still working on like, what is their new role as not an owner, founder, but as a participant in a much larger process.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add on the different types of buyers is, a lot of it depends on your goals as a seller. We break the universe down into kind of strategic buyers and then financial buyers. And so strategic buyers are, depending on what vertical of behavioral you're in, it's, the Acadias, the Lifestand's, Refresh, those types of buyers. Most of them are either private equity backed, or there's a few of them that are public. If you want to get out sooner, if you want to sell and go, say you're approaching retirement age, strategic buyer is probably a better option for you. Although, a lot of the strategics are sitting on the sidelines the last couple of years, so it somewhat limits your options. Financial buyers, there's so many more of them out there from, private equity, family offices, independent sponsors, search funds. I mean, there's all kinds of new financial buyers out there. So it just gives you a much broader, but they're generally going to want you to roll some sort of equity in most cases on the financial buyer side. So.
When you're going through that process too, do you recommend a more limited or broad process? Kevin, what do you usually recommend?
I'm a fan of the broad process for some of the reasons I've talked about before. Is that, you think, there are firms out there that prefer to do more of a limited process where maybe they pick, the top 20 or 80, buyers they think would be the best ones. We prefer to go to a much, much broader audience, because you just never know. People's mandates change all the time. Their theses change. We've got a deal under LOI right now that it's a pretty good size fund. This is a $4 million EBITDA autism business that I didn't think these guys made a lot of sense. But more we learned about why they thought this particular business would make the most sense for them, it became apparent to us and to our sellers. And so we would have never known that unless you run a broad process. So I think a broad process, it's more work for the banker, but it is, I think, better outcome for the seller.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that due diligence and negotiation phase. Josh, when you were going through that, what surprised you most about that due diligence negotiation phase? What kind of stood out to you?
Just how much information and how many different variations of the information they wanted, and how little of it did we have easily accessible that we didn't have to manually create. It was just very frustrating. I wish we had better systems and softwares in place to do that, but unless you're set up for a sale, it's very hard to know what they're going to want in advance and then create systems so you're prepared for it. So it's just a lot of time. And I have good people. Thankfully I had a full HR director. I had directors of different revenue discipline lines. So I had people to help me with this, but it's very tedious. Just asking, all your employees and all their pay rates and how it's changed over time and statuses and just everything they want. So they say it's an endoscopy and a colonoscopy at the same time. I might agree with that.
That is exactly what it is. That is the part that gives people the most deal fatigue. And Josh is right. You will not just get the question once. You will get it 5 times in 5 different ways. And it's managing that. And it becomes a difficult process. But the reality is there's no way to get through it other than to get through it. There's actually not a shortcut. You can't really leverage your way out of it. You kind of just have to get through it. And Kevin and I and your teams are there to help you. But at the end of the day, that process is it's like a second job. So you are not only running your business, but you are also running this due diligence process. And there's really no way to do it without you unless you already have teammates that know everything. And that's pretty unusual in my experience. So that part takes the most amount of time.
Can I answer someone's question from the chat about telling your team? Because I don't think we've talked about that yet.
Yes, please do.
Sure. Everyone's team is different and your relationship to your team members is different. And so you need to be very thoughtful about when you tell them, how you tell them, because what happens is as soon as you tell them, it creates a huge question mark. It's just unknown. and there are no knowns. You can't tell them anything for sure because you don't know how it's going to go. And so if you have people that have trouble with anxiety and needing to know things, like we tend to be control freaks that start practices. Like I'm a little bit of a control freak, probably less now than I was then, but you are used to being in control. You're used to knowing things. And when you decide to do this process, you do not know how it is going to go. And your team members are one step removed. So they have even more anxiety because they know less, right? And so you need to manage that. You need to understand who these people are and how they handle not knowing these types of things. And there's all different strategies, right? Like you can offer, stay bonuses and integration bonuses and transition. I mean, there's all these different things you can do. But ultimately, if you have good working relationships with your team members and you really understand who they are as people and professionals, you'll be okay. If you have crappy working relationships and not good communication with your team members, it will not be okay. I mean, I think that's just like the easiest rule of thumb. And just be prepared for that. People get very, very uncomfortable when they hear you're thinking about selling the company. They think worst case scenario. And it's not always true. Sometimes it's best case scenario. Like I think if you ask my team members now, they'd say, yeah, it's more work and it was adjustment, but now we have opportunities that we would never have before, right? Like our business is 10 times better than it was before the sale. But you don't know that. You can't convince them that that is going to happen. There's no words to convince or reassure anyone that it will happen. It's just time. It's just time. So.
And I did want to let the audience know, I know we have quite a few questions, which we will be able to follow up on a little bit later, because we are coming to the hour. So I just wanted to let everyone know, if we're not able to answer them now, we'll be circulating these as well. All right, we probably have time for one more question. Let's get into what is the most difficult part of the post-sale process. So now we're on life on the other side. Josh, why don't you take that one? What was it like for your employees, for your patients? What's life like on the other side?
So thankfully for my patients and employees, they would have no idea that it happened. For them, life is exactly the same. Maybe our benefits carrier change or the benefits are better, but really life for them should not be different. And a real good buyer will not want to impact business. If you have a good business, the last thing they want to do is do anything to hurt that. If you have a broken business, then they have a lot of work to do. So you really need to understand, is your company broken or is it really good? Because that will change, things will be different, after the sale. I would say integration and getting to know the team, like the M&A team is different from the integration team, which is different from the operations team. So you need to understand the life cycle, right? The M&A team are salespeople who are trying to buy your company. Like that is their job. The integration team are trying to blend the existing company, the buyer, with the processes of the seller, right? That's their job. And then the operations team are the ones that are running day to day. They all have different functions, and you need to understand how it's going to feel different moving through that space. And it's just adjusting, right? You're giving up your bank accounts. You're giving up control over the finances. You have people coming in and taking things off of your plate. You're being asked to do things differently, right? A good buyer will leave you in control of the clinical work. That's the way it should be. You're in charge of patients. They're in charge of the back end processes. But it's still an adjustment, right? It's still a new marriage. You haven't lived together for very long. You don't know, who likes to sleep on what side of the bed and who snores and who chomps with their mouth open. You don't know those things. You do get to know those things. And I'll say, as a platform company, one of the things that I love is that, or being part of a platform, I should say, now I have all these brothers and sisters and we're all in the same boat together. And that actually feels really good. So understanding, are you going to be the platform company or are you going to be a member of the of the portfolio, right? That's also very different. But again, it comes back to what I said before, is like, if you read the tea leaves and they're good, you're going to have a good experience all along the way. Also, I'd be prepared to get close to people and then they'll leave. Like in the corporate world, people come and go. It's much more common than I think in like clinical practice. We tend to be like, very family oriented and like someone leaves, it's such a big deal, and have patience, and it's like a whole thing. But in the corporate world, it's much more common for people to come and go and just get used to, now you're in the corporate world. You're part of a corporation that's not just your practice, and to embrace it, right? Because there's a lot to learn there for the positive, and ultimately trickle down for your patients. I think our patients are being taken care of way better than they were beforehand because of all of the supports that we have in place.
Hey, Laura, one just quick comment here. I know we're at time. I know we've had a lot of questions about the market. And, I'm happy to schedule a time with anybody, post-closing one-on-one, because look, I think the market in 25